Council Chair Pui, RDA Board Chair Pui is on his way. He's just a few minutes late, so I will start the meeting. Welcome to today's May 21st, 2024 Redevelopment Agency Board meeting. Our meetings are public and you're welcome to join us in person, on Zoom, or by watching from the City Council's agenda page, Facebook, YouTube, or SLC TV. And we'll hope you'll continue to join us in whichever manner you feel most comfortable. So today's RDA board meeting, the first item on our agenda is Section A, comments, and we do not have public comments today. Section B is public hearings. We also do not have those. So that brings us to Section C, redevelopment agency business. First item is a straw poll for releasing 9-line strategic intervention funds for property acquisition. Is there someone going to give us an introduction to this? Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board. This item is a follow-up from our meeting last week in terms of our budget amendment. This request is to allocate funding within our 9-line strategic intervention funds for a property in the vicinity of 900 West and 400 South. And we're looking for a straw poll from the board to do that so that we can proceed with working on that purchase this week.
Is there a straw poll? Yes.
I would like to propose a straw poll that we release the 9-line strategic intervention funds for property acquisition.
Second.
All right, so we have a straw poll from Board Member Young. All those in favor, thumbs up. That's 4-0.
Solid poll.
That is a quorum. Is that all you need for C1?
Yes, thank you very much.
Item number C2 is an overview of the redevelopment agency budget for fiscal year 2024 through 25. Looks like Ben Ludke is coming up to give us an introduction. Do you think we should wait for more council members to show up for this item?
I think that might be helpful.
Okay. We can do that. Let's see if there's anything else we can get done while we're waiting. Report and announcements from the executive director, who I think there are none. Reports and announcements from RDA staff. Do you have announcements?
We have no announcements, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
and I do not have an announcement, so I guess we can't do anything else. So we'll wait for more board members to show up before we start the budget briefing. So we'll have a brief recess, hopefully only 5 minutes or so. We'll see.
Thank you.
joining us. We had a little break going there. We are in item 2, overview of the redevelopment agency budget for fiscal year 2024-2025. We have at the table Danny Waltz, RDA Director. Please take it away. And Ben Lutke, Council Policy Analyst.
Do I go first? Do you go first?
I will actually probably just turn it over to RDA staff to go through the budget. I haven't had a chance to think about an intro, so they'll cover everything we probably need to cover anyway, and we can follow up with questions.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Sorry for that awkwardness of just making sure I wasn't stepping on anyone's toes. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. We appreciate the opportunity of being here today presenting our fiscal year 25 budget. I want to start by thanking Jen Bruno and Ben Lutke for the amazing work they do in the staff report. I think that covers a lot of information and provides some great insight into our budget. My goal today with the presentation is to try to provide some additional explanation in terms of how it relates with the numbers. I think if you've had an opportunity to read that memo, you've seen that quick preview of the RDA budget is we are focusing on 4 primary areas. The first being affordable housing. Obviously, we are continuing our investment in the development of affordable housing units. These appropriations that you see in the budget today are in alignment with what were in our annual housing funding strategies that you as a board approved recently. You also see that we are continuing our appropriations for our commercial assistance programs. So several project areas have allocations for those. We're in those conversations with you as board members, as well as economic development and housing stability as it relates to bringing forth those revised programs and policies. Within the budget, there are also several allocations for infrastructure projects, notably continuing design and construction drawings for both the daylighting of City Creek as it relates to Folsom Trail and also Japantown. And then we are continuing appropriations for future repairs and maintenance for the Gallivan Center. And then finally, you'll also see appropriations for public art, the largest being $300,000 within the 9-line project area for the installation of a significant public art within the 9-line project area. And then also, we're excited at the request for funding for the potential reinstallation of the goals of Salt Lake City, which once were at the Prudential Life Building, that is now Eccles Theater, and then also an opportunity within the Central Business District. So that summarizes at a very high level what are some of our main priorities with our appropriations. If we could go to the next slide, we'll jump on in. Mr. Chair, in the interest of time, I will go through this somewhat quickly, but provide information as appropriate. And so I say that so that if you or any members of the board have any questions at any time, just jump on in, and happy to explain something or answer any questions.
I'd like to take you up on that.
Quick.
And I know we're going from a very high level. I'm going to get down to like a level that is not for council members to be on. But where are the goals going?
That is the appropriation we'll have is we have about 2 or 3 options that we're looking at within the block that is where Eccles is now.
Goals.
Somewhere either maybe on McCarthy Plaza, attached or adjacent to the theater. We've got a few options, and the request for funds is to kind of do some of the initial design and engineering for how we can make those happen. So, but the goal is to keep them on the block as part of what was developed.
Is that the goal?
That is that is the goal of the goals.
Excellent. Okay. No, I asked about goals. And yeah, I'm really excited because they've been gone for a long time, and people, as we found out, not just me, really love those. So I'm excited to see them back. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, we'll jump on in. First slide here is just to kind of give some background. The RDA, if you'll recall, is technically an enterprise fund. We are not part of the city's general fund, but the RDA budget is made up of several different funds ranging from what are our project area funds and the obligations we have for the collection and spending of tax increment within those areas. And then we have our 4 different housing funds that range in priorities from what are our statutory obligations for housing contributions to also what are the funds for other housing sources, such as the city's funding our future contribution, And then the West Side Community Initiative is where we receive the funds from the inland port. And we also have multi-use funds, which big one is our program income fund, which is where we receive revenue that is not tax increment generated, either from our parking structures or retail operations or other. And then this is one of our most flexible uses of funds. And then our revolving loan fund is essentially what is considered our commercial loan program right now, and that is what is being looked at and amended. And then obviously we have our agency operations fund. Something you'll hear both within our presentation, and I think Jen explained this within her memo as well, is the term capital projects, which for the agency, a capital project means an appropriation of funds that do not drop to fund balance at the end of the year. They can carry over from year to year, and they provide the opportunity to provide funding and build it up over multiple years. Next slide, please. Simply put, agency budget process, we projected the revenues and sources that we anticipate receiving. We calculate and deduct what are our obligated expenses, and then the remaining balance of discretionary funds is what we use for our programs and projects. The purpose of this slide is just to kind of highlight some of those different sources that we receive as an agency, as well as explain some of the obligated expenses that we have within our budget. Next slide, please. This is a quick overview of the total budget amounts by the different funds, starting with the project areas. Then you have the housing, the multi-use, and the operations. You'll see that for the most part, year over year from fiscal year 24 to the recommended budget, the agency's overall budget has increased, and most of those funds have increased as well. The biggest change in our dollar amounts is within the Housing Development Fund. The $10.2 million appropriation in fiscal year 24, that included the $7+ million of dormant HUD funds from housing stability. So we don't have those this year. That is why there's such a significant drop there. And then from a staffing perspective, we are proposing and requesting one additional FTE. That's the only change within our operations and administration as it relates to personnel, and we get in a little bit more detail on that in a later slide.
Good. Danny, Mr. Chair, on the change in the adopted budget for, I'm looking at the Northwest Quadrant. Are we projecting that's going to have a pretty good steeper incline or increase year over year?
The tax increment?
Yeah.
That is an excellent question. Next slide, please. Oh, wait. No, it's not the next one. A little bit more, and I'll get to that. Sorry. I was hoping for a really dramatic moment there in transition, but I forgot we got to handle a little thing called organizational chart first. So give me 1 second. We'll get to that. Thank you. As I said, this is our organizational chart that's in the recommended budget. The only addition is that financial analyst position in the bottom right, which would help support our existing financial analyst in the efforts that she is performing. Okay, next slide.
Chair.
We'll get into.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I just have a quick question about the fiscal analyst position.
Yes.
So can you just kind of give an overview of what the current fiscal analyst is doing and what we'll have additional capacity for in a new FTE?
Perfect. Great question. Our current financial analyst, Erin Cunningham, number one, is the only position we really have in our agency that does not have any duplication. So it's an issue of she doesn't have any backup for anything that we do. As well as any support. She does work very closely with finance and finance staff and our budget manager, Mike Burns. But within the agency itself, when she's out, we're very often not able to proceed, especially with the way Workday is in terms of approvals. What she handles within the agency is everything from managing our loan portfolio to our tax increment projections to our reporting through Workday, working with our project managers and their staff in terms of their respective project budgets, accounts payable, accounts receivable. She oversees that with our other administrative support team. She works with our other taxing entities in terms of providing them the information they need to understand the tax increment allocations that we're having. We have a number of reporting requirements with both the state and how we report information to those taxing entities, as well as calculating those payments. So this budget is her in terms of every which way as far as the numbers, and then she works with finance to make sure we're coordinating those efforts to put it within the mayor's recommended budget. But most of these numbers are coming from her and her tracking and doing that.
Yeah, so I would just share with my fellow directors here. I can't imagine that portfolio being with a single individual, just in terms of that scale, scope, capacity, and responsiveness to the field. So I really like and support the decision personally, to be able to add an additional FTE specific to that workload.
I appreciate that. And that doesn't include the list of things we don't have time to get to that we do want to get to. So thank you. Okay, let's talk revenues. Next slide, please. Now the dramatic transition to how this looks year over year. Sorry, took me an extra minute there. This slide represents what that revenue from tax increment looks like across those various funds. You'll see the funds in the left column. First four columns, the 2020A to 2023A, represent what are the actual increment amounts and revenue that we've received for the various project areas. 2024B is what was budgeted for our current fiscal year, and 2024A is what is reflected now that we have received all of our revenue appropriations. 2024A essentially represents what is budget amendment 4 in front of you for approval right now. That assumes approval of that fourth budget amendment. 2025B is what is proposed as part of this next fiscal year's recommended budget. And then the column on the far right, you'll see that every project area, we pretty much are projecting a 2% increase, staying fairly conservative with the exception of Central Business District and Block 70, which is the Eccles block. We're holding those steady. And the main reason for that is as you look across the top blue line of Central Business District, while we had a really good positive turn this year, you can see the history has been a little up and down, so we're staying conservative on that and just holding that flat. So did that get to the question you're asking me? Okay. Any questions on this? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the tax increment obviously makes up the bulk of our revenue, 53 of our $66.5 million in revenue. This slide shows what is coming from our other sources. The Funding Our Future obviously is an allocation from the city. The Inland Port Housing is what we receive for that housing mitigation payment. Below that, you start to get into what represents our program income funds between parking structure income and loan repayments. And then also note the transition holding account, which is just over $3 million. This is also part of what is in Budget Amendment 4. This is the gathering of the extra money we received in this current fiscal year and rolling it over into fiscal year 25 so that you as a board can appropriate that as part of all of the other projects and programs. Next slide, please. So while that dealt with the tax increment and other source of funding, this is what the revenue looks like specifically for our housing efforts. This year, you'll see that we're proposing just over 9.3 in terms of housing revenue and use of those funds. The bulk of that is coming from State Street and Depot District. Below that, you also see what is the Inland Port Housing contribution, the loan repayments, and Funding Our Future. And then the transition holding account at the bottom there, again, is the carryover from this current fiscal year. Next slide, please. Next slide. So if that is the revenue side, our next step is taking out what are the agency's obligated expenditures. The bulk of this is our payments and our reimbursements to the various taxing entities as a function of the interlocal agreements we have with them, as well as our TI reimbursements, which are for private development. Our next biggest line items are debt service as it relates to both the Eccles Theater and Salt Lake City debt service, which is the North Temple Viaduct. From there, we get into several different allocations for either property management and maintenance or arts culture maintenance related to both Eccles and the Gallivan Center. We have a couple other line items in terms of school district requirements and payments for that. And then below that is our internal transfers just within different funds for the purpose of paying the debt service, our admin fees, and then also our housing contributions. Any questions on that? Great. Next slide, please. So revenue minus the obligated expenses now gets us to what is our discretionary expenses of where we can then apply these to our programs and policies. Across the top, you'll see the various project area funds. And then the column on the right for program and projects, everything gets allocated into either a program or a project. A program within the context of Workday represents essentially a pool of money that you as a board identify as kind of a program hierarchy. So that's housing, commercial, infrastructure, operations, very high level bucket of funds. From there, we can allocate it to specific projects. So a project is a specific development that is approved by the board, that we are able to move forward with spending. All projects have to come from an appropriation. You can have an appropriation without a project, which basically means it's just like a holding account, or it can go into a project, which is then something we can go out and actually start spending on that project. You can have a project that pulls from multiple appropriations, but if you want to have a project, you have to have an appropriation at a program level. So I'll go through those. The blue rows are the programs and the white are projects. So if we start just within the CBD project area, you'll see that we have a $250,000 appropriation for the program of Galvin maintenance and repairs. And then below that is the specific project that exists now. That's why it has a number for Galvin repairs. Moving on, you then see that we have a $600,000 allocation for the infrastructure improvements program. That is split then between two new projects. The first of which is $100,000 for the design of construction documents for Japantown, so that we can really hone in on what the potential cost is for those improvements. And then the second $500,000 is for a new project, a Galvin playground. Is following up on the visioning and design options for Galvin. We wanted to propose to lead out with an improvement this next year and focus on something that can be activated for kids. Below that, still within the CBD column, is a $450,000 appropriation for arts and culture. This is split between $300,000 for Japantown art and then $150,000 for an additional CBD public art project that we don't have a location or idea for, but this is something we would work with the Arts Council to identify and move forward with. And then down at the bottom is a $2.5+ million appropriation and new project, Downtown for All. This is to carry out the mayor's goal of providing activation within downtown for not just families, but visitors and all generations. And that would be a specific project. Any questions so far on program, project, and how we're doing this?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
So I do have a question about Downtown for All. So is that, I'm just trying to understand that in relationship to some of the existing like city actions downtown. So is this in addition to, or?
This would be in addition to. This would be looking at ideas such as how to support daycares, how to support other opportunities for play. What are some of those? It could be family-sized housing or other amenities that support those initiatives.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful.
Any other questions? I will second that question about learning a little more about the Downtown for All new project, as is marked in there. It's a lot of money. And,
it is.
And I will, I want to know what is activation type funding and what is infrastructure, brick and concrete type of things. I would like to know a little more. That's a significant chunk of money there. And at the same time, we're talking about, having activation on Main Street, led by the city and the Downtown Alliance. But, we are, talking about activation here. So a little more information on that will be very useful for me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's a great point. Our intention with this request was really to be able to quickly go from the mayor stating this is a priority, wanting to have funds available to make a difference. I think Jen brought up a great point in her memo that, and in relation to your comments, Mr. Chair, if that is something that you as a board would prefer us to come back to and provide information, then we would recommend just bumping that up to a program appropriation rather than have it be stated as a new project. So that can certainly be something that you all recommend as part of the budget approval.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I have to go back one step just on the administrative budget side of the house. But are we going to, do you have many more slides and we can just ask that question at that point?
Ask a question for?
Do you have an administrative side of the house, an administrative budget?
We do have an administrative slide, yes.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay. Jumping over to Block 70, which is location of Eccles.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask about the Japantown, the art and the construction documents funding, and I
Yes.
can take this answer later or have a conversation about it, but I'm just interested in how those get appropriated, and will the art run through the Arts Council, or I'm interested in the process of how that goes out.
Yes.
And I don't know if it's legal or with our procurement rules or not, but if it could be that the same consultant that did the design for, or the initial visioning for Japantown, could do the construction documents. That seems like it might be a little bit smoother, and I know that they have built they already have that history with the community, but I don't know if that's legal under procurement opportunities. I'm just interested in knowing what our options are for that process. So
We
I
can certainly
have
get
that
back with the
conversation
details. I think on the construction side, that's what staff is looking at right now, is what on the art side, we have already started working with the Arts Council and identifying those opportunities. That's how the need for additional funds came about, as they were consulting us on that.
And then I'll just put it into the air. I'd love to chat with the Arts Council as well about how that process will be run, and just get a little more information. I know it's an administrative process, but I'm very interested in how we structure the RFP and whatever we do. So
we'd be happy to touch base
Thanks.
with you on that. Thank you. Okay, so Block 70 Echoes, this is where you see continuation of the $25,000 request for additional programming. Regent Street, McCarthy Plaza, as well as the lobby of the theater. That's been very helpful in terms of working with the county to have additional opportunities for that level of event and programming. And then the new project is the $55,000+ to start looking at the options and design for the reinstallation of the goals. Next column over, Depot District, most notably is $3.7 million within infrastructure improvements. This is related to the project assignment for the infrastructure needs in and around the Rio Grande District, as part of that development opportunity that we are working on and that you have seen the plan for. Next column over, Granary District. This is where you see an appropriation of $1.263 million for the commercial assistance reserves. Again, that is a holding account, so as those programs are created and adopted by the board, we would follow that up with the budget amendment requesting for those funds to then be appropriated to carry out that program. So you will see those programs before those funds are released.
Board member.
Thank you. Just to verify, would you still have to come in front of the board to release those funds, to have those funds released, or are they appropriated? Are you able to use them already?
We would need to have a budget amendment to where those would then be appropriated to the specific project, which is the loan program. And then much like the housing program, each individual loan would then also come to you for approval as well. Moving on to North Temple, we have a $300,000 project appropriation for the reuse planning. This is specific to the agency's property that we own on Folsom. Primarily, this will be used for the Shovers Electronics property, but also other property that we acquire could be utilized for that as far as what those options can be. And then, as I mentioned, the $50,000 appropriation for the design, further design of the City Creek daylighting plan along Folsom. And then at the very bottom is an appropriation, strategic intervention, $861,000. That is essentially the holding count that we referenced within strategic intervention program. Moving over to 9 Line, the highlights there include $300,000 for the 9 Line Public Art Project. That's a new project that'll be combined with the $150,000 you approved as a board last year to do a significant art piece within that project area. I don't know if you're leaning in to ask a question or just really, really excited for the details of the budget.
We're talking about.
Okay. And then continuing with 9 Line, also a $1.99 million appropriation in the strategic intervention account. State Street, you'll see internal transfer of $1 million to secondary housing fund. Our 2 housing funds, primary housing fund is what we were obligated by state statute to appropriate from project areas for affordable housing. Secondary housing fund is if you as a board decide to appropriate above and beyond that. And so this $1 million is from State Street for that purpose, putting more money towards affordable housing. So that's what that program appropriation is. And then below that, the bulk of the State Street money from there is also going towards strategic intervention as a holding account. And then lastly, in West Capitol Hill, this will be the last year you likely see West Capitol Hill. We just finished our project of the Marmalade Plaza. As a function of holding onto those funds, we have to realize and spend the interest earnings on that. And so right now we're proposing to put those towards the Arctic Court infill home construction. RDA owns a lot. It's the last piece of what will be West Capitol Hill is a project to build a home on it. This, along with another appropriation, are more than enough funds that we anticipate needing for the construction. It's very high, I know, but the function of that is, one, we want to make sure we have enough money to do the project because this is our last chance, and our priority will be to spend these funds down first. I'll show you the other funds in a minute, but this would spend out the entire end of the project area tax increment. The reason we're asking for so much is these are interest earnings. As good of a job as we're doing right now of reconciling what we think this number will be, we won't know that yet, so we want to make sure we have a buffer in case we need more funds, but these will be spent first. Any question on these expenses before I move on?
No, but just wanted to say one more time, thank you to you and your team for getting Marmalade Plaza open. I just handed out some stickers from the opening, and I just think it's going to be such a great addition to the neighborhood, a great public space. And it's been so long in the making, but it was worth the wait. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions? Great. Next slide. So those are the expenses within the project areas. Now we have our other funds in terms of housing funds and multi-use. You'll see the first four columns are our respective housing funds: primary, secondary, West Side Community Initiative, and the Housing Development Fund. If you look at that column of housing funds total, which is kind of the yellowish cream, you'll see that our main appropriations are first and foremost $4.586 million into what is our competitive notice of funding availability for our housing development loan program. Below that, we have an allocation of $417,000+. This is a function of our interlocal agreement with the school district. We have to set aside funds specific to this type of housing, family and workforce. So we have been putting that aside. That is sitting in a reserve fund. You will likely see this come back to you as a board either as a appropriation for a project request, but more likely as we do the NOFA and we come to you and rank those loans, we may come back and ask to pull these funds into that to help fund some of those loans if there is a project that meets those requirements. So right now they're just being set to the side to make sure that we're tracking them and we're applying them appropriately, but those will probably start getting utilized as that amount has been growing. Then below that is the $1 million from the West Side Community Initiative for strategic intervention. This is primarily for the purpose of just having funds available for property acquisition.
Danny, since we mentioned the school district, I'm sure that you probably already do this, and maybe you even already told me, which is very likely. But I'm interested on having every so often, to your capacity, a way of tracking, and I know that you're doing this, tracking how each project area has contributed to our housing priorities, and with numbers, right, of units, and on projects that we are funding in the future that will yield units based on the budget priorities that we have in each that we had set as a board, and and I believe that will be very useful data if it could be consolidated. All for the RDA, but certainly for each area, project area, certainly to clarify some of the misconceptions that are floating out there about how this board uses and this city uses the money that we get from school district and so on. So I will appreciate that information for.
We can do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, as I mentioned, the $1 million for strategic intervention. The next is $500,000 for the Arctic Court infill home. Again, this is in addition to that other $384. We realize it's a significant dollar amount. We don't anticipate spending it all, but what we don't spend from this fund will drop to fund balance and stay with housing, so it will continue to be available. The priority is just to make sure we build that home first. Then moving into the next three columns, this is our multi-use funds. You see in the revolving loan fund, it's the carryover of the loans that we receive, as well as in program income. You'll see in addition to charges and services and some basic maintenance, we're proposing two projects. One is an ongoing allocation of reserve funds for Gallivan repairs. We're looking ahead knowing we have some serious maintenance repairs and replacement that we have to do. So this is really just setting aside funds so that we can meet those obligations when we need to do those repairs. And then an additional $500,000 in demolition costs for the Sugar House properties. This includes both the DI, the former fire station, and the public services maintenance shed there. And so this is in addition to the $500,000 you allocated last year. We hope that's more than we need, but in terms of looking at that site and not just demolishing the existing structures, but also looking at what site work needs to be done in anticipation of extending the S-line and being able to install that, there's probably going to be some significant site work that we have to do in terms of utilities and backfilling and structural fill. So that's why we're asking for a little bit more. Any questions on any of these allocations? No? Okay, next slide, please. Here's our operations fund. Revenue, obviously a little over 738,000 increase. Personnel, the increase in personnel is a function of one, obviously the one new FTE, but then also the two project coordinator positions that you approved last year. Those, as we're filling those have been reclassified to a project manager and a senior project manager, so there's a slight increase in salary there. And then the rest of it is just the normal increases in allocation and salaries that we realize as part of our staff. The increases in charges and services and operating maintenance, as part of our adopted budgets, we have been proposing lower amounts, mostly because a huge part of where we get our admin costs is from the central business district project area. And because that has been low, we've tried to maintain our admin costs low, and we've only brought those up in terms of budget amendments as we know that we're realizing the funds. So the actual amounts that you see in the note for fiscal year 23 of actual costs were about $419,000 and $660,000. So bumping these up to $450,000 in next year's budget pretty much puts us in line with what our actual spending has been. It's just now is a better reflection because we're getting that additional money in CBD so we can have more confidence that we're going to be able to hit these from the beginning.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. And I guess the question coming from the staff report is that your admin fees and these expenses come from the different districts, and you at times you're going to have districts that fall out. And so I guess there's a note, there's a couple of districts that are going to fall out, which provide 22% of the admin fees. Yep. So those are going to fall out. And I don't see districts coming in to replace those, that revenue coming in from those districts. And how do you plan to budget that in the outgoing years?
That's going to be the question we have to figure out over this next year.
Okay.
As we prepare for fiscal year 26. There's a few dynamics to that. Obviously, as our project areas drop, like Depot and Granary, we will lose those admin contributions. Newer project areas, such as the HTRZs, are capped at 2% of admin. So immediately there's a math problem that we have to fill. CBD is the only project we have that does not have an admin cap to it. And so that's why, a higher portion of what we pull is from CBD. We do need to look for other sources. I think Jen has mentioned a few of those in her staff report that we need to explore and start looking at kind of how we charge admin both internally within our respective funds, what we do within the context of the city, as well as how we fill that gap.
And you also see a decrease in the staffing requirements when districts go down, or the staffing level still stays up because you have a couple new districts coming in line that are maybe a different need as far as staffing is concerned?
It's a great question. I think with the project areas that we're looking at right now with the HTRZs, we'd probably remain pretty constant because both of those pretty much overlay over Granary and Depot. So as those are dropping off, we're kind of re-upping them with the HTRZs. So from a staffing level, I'd say those are probably going to be similar. And if there's any slight decrease in that, that would probably be made up with the increased amount of housing loans we do, as well as once we really go all in on promoting and marketing our commercial loan programs, that will increase workload as well.
Okay, sorry, one more question. And just on this whole staffing side of the house, do you have any vacancies at this time, or you're full except for the ones that you're asking for?
We're in the process of, we have just hired and we'll be bringing on 3 staff members to fill all of our project manager positions. We are in the hiring process for our open office facilitator position, and then that fills us up in terms of the RDA side. And on the Gallivan side, we're in the process of hiring the new Gallivan director, and then I think that will fully staff them. So by the end of the fiscal year, I think we'll be fully staffed again.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I just wanted to be maybe even a little more direct, just so the board can read between the lines of the suggestions in the staff report. I think the role of the RDA has evolved since the initial model, where it was very project area focused, and now it's much more a part of a broader city strategy on housing and community investment, things like that. And so to the there is no prohibition in state law against using general fund dollars as we do with any other department. And so that's one of the considerations where you could factor it, just like you fund an economic development department with general fund dollars, you fund a planning department with general fund dollars, based on the RDA's citywide role and impact. That might be a consideration in the future that you could consider if project areas are no longer sufficient to keep the staffing up.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I think we have to consider that. I think that the number of things that we're asking the RDA to do, even in the meeting that I had earlier today, talking about coordinating with economic development to support local businesses, we're asking them to do things that are not just specific and come up with programs and projects that are not just specific to the project areas. So I think we should consider funding that is not only specific to tax increment, but I'm glad that we don't have to do that this year. It sounds like it'll happen pretty soon. And so I'm putting it out there for the future that I think that to me seems reasonable, but who knows who will be here to make that decision at that time.
It also seems, I agree, and it also seems to me that we might want to try to pursue changes on the HTRC law and to accommodate a little of that. I mean, wishful thinking here, but we try all angles, and I think that it makes sense to me to pay for the cost of managing those areas by those dollars. But I think that's something that I would love to add to the list of things that we can talk to our legislators and see if we can pursue as well. But I agree with you, Board Member Mano, about needing more money, and if we need to, for sure, supporting the agency. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay.
We did lobby our state legislators, and we were successful at increasing the admin fee from 1% to 2%. So technically they doubled it, but I think we're going to need a little bit more. So thank you, Mr. Chair, on that. Next slide, please. One more, thank you. This just highlights what we've talked about in terms of within the Commons. You'll see that 2 positions were quote unquote eliminated, but they were reclassified as a project manager and a senior project manager. And then the financial analyst 3 would be the one new position that takes us from 21 to 22 staff members. Next slide. No changes on the Gallivan side for this year. However, I anticipate in terms of the recommendations for not just the design and changes that may happen to Gallivan from a physical standpoint, but also looking at what the staffing, programming, and activation levels may change for Gallivan. This is just a preview that next year I would anticipate we may be asking for an additional staff member or 2 to help with those as we kind of look at improving and increasing the level of programming and activation at Gallivan. Next slide.
Chair.
Let's go ahead.
Just preemptively ahead of next year's discussion related to Gallivan, it would be really helpful for me to see kind of like what the baseline is in terms of programming, what the increase is that we're proposing, and how that transpires in terms of like generated economic development and revenue in the area.
Great. Absolutely. We can do that. And then finally, I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to Erin Cunningham, our financial analyst. It says just with support from, but she did all of the heavy lifting on this, along with staff. And thanks to Mary Beth and Greg Cleary and Mike Burns, our budget manager, for all of their help in not just putting this presentation together and providing us the numbers, but year round. So thank you, Mr. Chair. With that, we're done, and I'm willing to answer any questions.
Good. Okay, I think all the questions were answered for the moment, for the time
Perfect.
being. Thank you so much. Thank you to your staff. I learned to appreciate the amount of work and passion that your staff has for these projects, and to seeing them through. It takes years sometimes, and a lot of work to pencil some of this. So I'm not only impressed with your leadership, but with every single one of the members of the RDA. Jennifer?
Thank you.
I just wanted to open to the board. If you come across anything in the RDA budget as you read it further over the next several weeks, please forward any of those questions to council staff, and we'll make sure that the RDA gets them. The way that we schedule our briefings, it looks like we only have one budget briefing for the RDA, but we can schedule as many additional discussions about the RDA budget as needed before you consider adopting it in conjunction with the council's budget. So just know that that offer's on the table.
Thank you. I think that concludes the item. Thank you so much. And I believe that all the pieces, but we have our executive director for the RDA here. I want to make sure we're good. No announcements from the executive director. I think this meeting is adjourned. We're going to 1 minute.
We will come back in council meeting, so I don't think we have any. Do we have anything else on the agenda?
No, this agenda is done.
Okay.
I just want to know when we're coming back.
Let's maybe give 5 minutes to reconvene as the council. Would that be enough time, Cindy Lou? Okay.
5 minutes, we reconvene. Thank you.
And then just for people in the room, we will start with a council closed session. So.